Welcome to the panel room. Today we're discussing audiobook narration. Before we get started, let's go around the room, have everyone introduce themselves, and we'll go ahead and start with you, Joel.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for asking me to be here. I'm Joel Froomkin, and I also record as Joel Leslie for LGBT material. That's me.
All right, perfect. Stuart?
Hi, everyone. I'm Stuart Jaffe. I'm the author of over 40 novels, best known for the Next Port Paranormal Mysteries. And most of those, I've done the narration myself for the audiobooks, which I just realized I have my microphone in the shot, so that's nice and convenient. And so that's why I'm here, because I've done a lot of audiobooks. Oh, wait, I almost forgot. I used to do audio narration for Intergalactic Medicine Show back when Ed Schubert was the editor.
Oh, perfect. KJ?
Hey, I'm KJ. I record under Kristen James. And yeah, I love thriller and horror, and I do a lot of romance.
Perfect. John?
Hey, I'm John Solo. I record as John Solo, also as Jack Wayne. I record a lot of romance, so much romance, but I've also worked on a lot of John Hartness's stuff. I think he's a part of this deal, and Gail Martin as well. Yeah, that's me.
All right. Finally, Kale.
Hi, I'm Kale Williams. I also record as Sean Patrick Hopkins. Kale is what I narrate all my romance under, and I've done some of Gail Martin's work as well, and she's the one that asked me to be here, so I'm happy to talk with everybody.
All right, perfect. So I'll go ahead and start with you, Stuart. What brought you to narrating? And for you especially, your own books.
Yeah, well, it's been a long road. Most of it is because throughout the years, I've actually developed all the skills necessary to do it myself in different ways. My undergraduate degree was in theater, and so I learned very early on. I've learned how to use my voice. When podcasting first came out, my wife and I started the Eclectic Review podcast, which ran for 6 years, and at the end of those 6 years, we were the longest running podcast in our genre up to that point. Plenty have surpassed us by now, but back then we had like 400 some episodes, and so I had all the equipment. And when the time came to start looking to doing it, I just realized I had the skills, I had the equipment, and most importantly, I enjoyed it, because there are a lot of people who do it just to save money, and they don't enjoy it and aren't very good at it. And so, I usually tell them, go hire these people and others like them. But that's kind of how I ended up in it, is just I had all the pieces and I just put them together.
All right, perfect. KJ?
Well, I went to college and ended up becoming a theater major. That wasn't the original plan, but life. And when I graduated, it was kind of like, well, what do I do with this now? And I started taking some voiceover specific classes after that. And my coach was like, hey, do you know what ACX is? It's this thing. It's basically like a matchmaking website between authors and narrators. And you can get started and start your voice acting career there. And so I kind of did. I just went out and, the whole marketing scene and trying to find some work and find some cool writing and bring some life to it.
John?
Well, I started as an audio engineer. I owned a company called Falcon Sound Company, and I produced about 400 audiobooks with that. Sitting on the other side of the glass as a producer and an engineer, and it ended up being one of the best master classes you can get. I had a lot of great actors on the other side. I got to watch them work, and I picked up a couple titles, my wife and I, along the way. She wanted to do this as well, and it turns out I had a couple of Hartnesses were some of the first, Bubba the Monster Hunter, that ended up being fairly successful, and I enjoyed it much more than I ever thought I would. Actors are a precocious bunch. I didn't think I fit in, but it turns out I roll in there just fine. 7 years later, somewhere in that range at this point, I've done close to 300 titles, and I'm having the time of my life. I I think it's about it. I wanted to be an action star, but I don't have the looks. And then I was going to travel the world as an itinerant adventurer, and that didn't work out as well. So yeah, I'm here.
All right, Kale.
Yeah, I started off, I studied theater in college as well. Among other things, I studied behavioral neuroscience and speech pathology before that, and then ended up with a speech and theater major, and worked as an actor for about a decade after that. Did a lot of theater in the Boston area, and then all around the country. I moved to New York, and it was around the time, as KJ mentioned, that ACX came out. That it was actually my wife who was first interested in it, and she came to me. She said, "I want you to." We had a small, fourth floor walk up in Queens, and she with two very small closets. And she said, "I want you to turn my closet into a studio." She said, "I want to do this, and now's the chance." So I got a shelf from IKEA and some acoustic foam, kind of figured it out, watched a lot of videos on YouTube, and set her up. And then it was about a year later we got married, and I had been going out of town a lot. So I decided, I need something to keep me busy and keep me in town. So I started it, not just thinking it would be a side gig, and I ended up falling in love with it. And so it's slowly become my full-time job. I love doing it.
And finally, Joel.
My undergrad was in theater, and then my master's was as well. My undergrad was in performing. My master's was with an emphasis on directing and design. And I also, along the way, ended up being a dialect specialist because of a series of weird growing up skills and other things. But then I was a director for many, many years, working as an assistant director and stuff in New York and things like that. My husband now, then my partner, and I wanted to start a theater company, and we moved to the middle of nowhere in Indiana, and for 10 years ran a theater company, and just couldn't take living there anymore. It was a lot. We needed to kind of get out. So we needed a change of life. And, I was also a theater professor there. I ran a drama department. And I also dialect coached like national tours and stuff like that. And a friend of mine, who I'd known since I was about 16, from back home in Bermuda, suggested, she was like, she does this and she's fantastic. And she was like, why don't you try doing this? And I went to ACX and I auditioned for a title, and I got the title. And it just, within 3 months, I was full time. I was very, very lucky. I think the combination of acting background, the directorial skill that I'm able to use on myself, and the dialect knowledge is this weird triptych of things that allowed me to kind of find a niche. So I was really, I love it, and I've been doing it full time since then, and 300 titles later, I'm still enjoying it. So yeah.
All right, perfect. So KJ, I'll start with you. Let me back up a bit. Most people probably don't understand what all goes into narrating a book. They just see the book come out, and then a couple months later, oh, here's the audiobook. That was easy. So what goes into narrating?
Well, I mean, it's definitely different from title to title, because I mean, if you have a really like dense historical something, you're going to have to go find all of those place names and all of those perfect pronunciations from whatever that particular era was. And so there's just a lot of research involved with something like that, where if it's just like a light little kind of basically a chick flick, like a light romance, and it's just a story of two people and how they come together, then there's a lot less like real deep research you need to do there. The most important thing is to always read the entire thing before you start doing anything else. It's just read the whole book. As I go through, I like to play around with the voices, and I'll do pieces of it out loud as I'm prepping, just to kind of see. And a lot of times my first impression from chapter 1, by the time I get to the end of the book, I'm like, oh no, that's not that character at all. She's this whole other different thing now that I know her. So it's all about like getting a feel for the world that the author builds, really getting to know the characters themselves and just trying to tell their truth.
Do you get any feedback from the author, or do you
Oh,
get?
yeah, for sure. I love being in contact with the authors. It's so much nicer than when it's more of like a, here's the book, have fun. Um, I really love to collaborate and say, like, what was your vision for this person? Like, did you see them as being like really manipulative, or are they just really sweet and naive? And any kind of thing like that can really make your voice completely three-dimensional and capture what it is the author was going for.
Okay. John, how is it for you?
My process has changed over the years. First off, reading the book is essential, although I will say that for maybe half the titles that I do now, I actually use a researcher and a pre-reader. That is my wife. She's also a narrator, and we work fairly well together. We've been together for quite a while, so for a lot of the romance titles, we kind of have a system worked out. She'll pre-read. We'll go over the project together. She'll give me a Cliff Notes version with each chapter, characters. She knows every voice that I do, so she kind of lays it out in advance, and we'll chat about it beforehand. And typically I'll do 1 or 2 chapters just to kind of get a feel and play those for her and go back. Once we get into production, actually, I'm digging this thing lately we've been doing on Discord. It's pretty awesome. There are several rooms in Discord that narrators can work in. It's kind of like a virtual recording studio. There's 8 or 10 rooms in each one. You hop in, and other narrators can observe you working. Some fans are in there as well. It's really kind of stepped up my productivity. It's working in front of a crowd, which I come from a musician background originally when I was a kid, so I really enjoy that sort of thing. But anyways, we get into the recording process. There are, depending on how I picked up the project, if it's an indie project, oftentimes I'm in direct contact with the client, most of the time being the author. And at that point, I'll obviously go over kind of any ideas that they have with the characters. Oftentimes, they just kind of give me the project and say, run with it. We trust you. We hired a pro. Go at it. With the publisher, 9 times out of 10, that's almost always the case. Sometimes they will give us notes. Most of the time, not. They're saying, we trust you. Roll with it. Either way, it's fine with me. As long as they trust me to do my job and let me do it, that's awesome. After we do the actual production itself, we're going to send it off to a proofer and an editor. Typically for me, those are the same person. I used to, in the past, when I first started having my own production company, I had those people in-house. Now I hire and outsource for that, and that's fantastic. They go through the entire project. They will mark any mistakes that I made. They will send those back to me for what we call pickup lines. And as well, oftentimes they'll have to, I do a pretty good job of giving them a recording that's well-timed, that sort of thing, but occasionally there might be extraneous noises in between lines. Sometimes they'll take those out too. They send it back to me. Being an audio engineer, I kind of love the mastering process, so I will master my own projects if they're an indie project. If it's a publishing house, I don't even have to do the proofing and editing. I just send it off to them, and they take care of the rest. It's a wonderful deal. And then my favorite part, they pay me, and then I'm on to the next one. So I think it's about it.
Now, you were saying that being on Discord in front of a crowd makes you more productive. Does it change your flow in other ways?
Yeah, in a wonderful way, actually. One of the good things and one of the bad things for me about being a narrator is I'm in here 6 to 8 hours a day, every day, this little tiny room by myself. There's no interaction. That can be a great thing, but can also be a bad thing after a while. The interaction of being able to look over to my screen here, my recording computer is actually here. I'm focused on the script, I'm reading, I'm recording, and occasionally I get to look over, and fans and other narrators typically have a crowd between 5 to 10 people, sometimes more, sometimes less, but I can look over and see a reaction to what I've done. If I'm looking to get a laugh, if I'm looking to get any sort of emotional reaction, I can look over and see people actually chatting and saying, wow, that was amazing. That voice sucked. Anything like that. It's immediate. It's crowd response. I'm used to being on a stage and everything I do, people applaud or they leave, one or the other. So this gives me that one-on-one. It has really immensely changed my workflow. And it's also given a bit more accountability. It's also been fairly easy as a narrator and working for yourself. We're all small business owners here. Working for yourself, some days are better than others. Some days you can push your way through and hit your goals. And other days, there's cats on Facebook. They're all over the place. You can see those little cat pictures just everywhere. it gets a little distracting. This gives a bit more accountability as well. Hey, I'm going to be recording at 10 a.m. Who's going to be there? It's a wonderful deal. I also have a Facebook group, John Sullivan's Beer Brigade. I'm not giving a plug or anything, even though I just did. But yeah, that's a wonderful outlet for me as well. I can go in there. I do videos a few times a week, and I can interact with the fans. It's really changed everything. The last year has been really cool for me in that regard.
All right, perfect. Kale, what's your process like?
Pretty similar to what we've heard. It again depends on if you're working with a publisher or with directly with an author. I really enjoy that interaction with an author when we get the chance. And it's interesting because every author is different. Some are really hands off and they, say, this is what I've done. I trust what your process. I'm the writer. You bring it to life with your voice, and there's that, and then there's the people who will send you, detailed biographies of every character within the book, which is also helpful. And then there's everything in between. So, it's all a different experience, but it can all be pretty gratifying. And sometimes, depending on the book, sometimes I'll send voice samples for different characters along to to kind of get an idea of where we stand between my ideas and the author's ideas, and other times I'm just given free rein to run with it. And then there are unique. I've had a couple of unique experiences this year doing sometimes doing series that other people have done. So, you've got one character's point of view, and then I come in as a different character, but maybe I've been established in an earlier book. So I'm kind of piggybacking off what the previous narrator has done while still bringing, what I bring to it. And I've got to stay true to what they've done to the other characters, for the listener's sake. And also there's, I was lucky enough to be involved in a Star Wars book this year, as well as a book in the Halo universe. So these were unique in that you're dealing with characters that are very well known to the fans, to the listeners. So it was a really interesting process to get those voices and those characters and bring them to life in a natural and honest way for me, while still being very, very true to what has already been established. So, it runs the gamut, but it's creative every which way. Whether you're working, really closely with an established world or with the author who has very strong opinions and points of view, or if you're just kind of flying solo. So it's a fun job.
When you're dealing with characters that a previous narrator has already established, what do you do you try to keep, say, the accent they did or the mannerisms?
Yeah, it's I would stay true to the accent, which is probably in the text as well. And anything you can latch onto, whether it is a characteristic, being more open or being more sneaky or manipulative or whatever that may be. And there may be vocal qualities too. I could be piggybacking off somebody who's got a much deeper voice than I do, and so I'm gonna err on the deeper side than some of the other characters. That's kind of where you start from.
Okay, Joel.
Yeah, I think everything everybody's already said. I really like working closely with authors whenever I can. I try and get access to them to some degree. I send them a questionnaire that's that is quite extensive in terms of my use. It is not meant to be a verbose response from them, but it is definite keywords and key ideas and thoughts that I like them to kind of hit for me characteristics, level of education, geographically where they grew up, you know, any information that we don't know about them. Will they become a main character in a later series, in a later part of the series? You know, are there any vocal descriptors that I might miss that you say in one line on page 240? You have no idea how often that happens. I just did a book where the author did not mention until past page 200 that the lead character grew up in Virginia, in a passing throwaway line that in a pre-read you could have easily missed. Things like that. I really like to work closely with them, and you know, and sometimes they love it and sometimes they don't. And personally, when they try and just sort of go, oh, I'm not good at this or whatever, you know, I will say to them, if you don't know what your character sounds like, you cannot expect me to. So I tell them it's their insurance policy. When I work with them, I literally say, this is your insurance policy to make sure I don't suck, because I can't get into your brain. And there will be things you didn't put on the page or that may have gotten edited out that make this character come alive in your imagination that I won't find there. And so if you can help guide me, the more you give me, the more you're going to be happy. And it may not make a hill of beans difference to the listener, but it does make a huge difference to the author, because they're the ones who sort of preconceive in their head. And it's interesting how sometimes authors will think visually but not orally. You know, the number of times I've gotten, for a character they'll describe as alpha male, low, growly, and sexy, and every single, you know, modifier in the text is like, he said in his deep bass warm tone, and they'll be like, this is Ryan Reynolds. And I'm like, have you ever listened to Ryan Reynolds? Ryan Reynolds talks up here. Hey, what's going on? And so there will be a disconnect in their brains as to what a character looks like and what a character sounds like, or a celebrity or a guide casting, which I always ask for. I ask them for who they would, you know, who they would dream cast in like a Hollywood version of it. So that can be interesting, and they'll need some guidance there. But no, I really like working closely with authors. So I find it much more liberating and less stressful. If I'm working blind, it's an awful week in the booth. You know, I just did a Dracula book for a publisher. And it is literally set right after Dracula leaves London. It's not like a vampire, but it is a Dracula book. And they gave me author notes, but the author never said what he sounded like. And I was like, okay. And it says he's from Eastern Europe. And I was like, okay, he's going to be from Eastern Europe. And I, like, the whole time I had this nightmare that she was imagining this like sexy, smooth Benedict Cumberbatch English accent, which doesn't make any sense in the text, but lots of people play it that way. Anyway, so when you have access to them, it makes my life much less tightly wound. It makes me much happier.
And what do you do when you don't have that? Do you send stuff over fast in smaller batches? Or do you just,
no,
like you said, you just wing it?
They're still never going to hear it.
Yeah.
You're never, the authors, the publisher is not going to send it to the author to say, do you like this? It's just because they want the path of least resistance. They're dealing with hundreds of authors, possibly a week, hundreds of titles, and they can't deal with minutia and ego and stuff like that. Now, if you have a specific question, they will often ask as a conduit if you don't have a direct relationship with the author, and you can ask that stuff. And you know, and I often do. So sometimes you can get to them, and sometimes you're mid-process and a question suddenly comes up and you know that it's going to take 4 days to get an answer back. So you just kind of have to trust your gut, you know. So you go on your instincts.
Perfect. Stuart.
Well, my process is completely different from everybody's here because I don't need to read the books because I wrote them. I don't need to ask the author how to pronounce a name because I made the name up. I write a lot of fantasy, so there's often weird names and weird spellings. The only research I really ever have to do for a word is sometimes I'll I have in one series I have a character who's Hispanic, and so I threw in a lot of Spanish words, which I had no idea how to. I wasn't putting them in thinking someday I'm going to have to say these words. I just wrote the, I looked up a translation and okay, that's what I need. So then I had to go figure out how to actually say those words. Or there's been a couple odd Egyptian, like ancient Egyptian words that I didn't even know the beginning of how to pronounce, and those kind of things I have to research. But like I said, I already know the characters. I know where they're going in future books that haven't even been written, which ones are important, which ones aren't. All of that I know. So for me, I don't have to do any of that. I just can start start recording practically. One of the other differences is this is not the production of audiobooks is not the core of my job. Writing books is the core of my job, and as I'm a hybrid author, so some of my books are produced and audiobooks are produced by other people, but the ones I do completely on my own, the audiobooks are a facet of it, but not the whole thing. So I don't spend 6 to 8 hours a day recording. I basically in what I call my recording season, which is pretty much every part of the year except for the winter when the heat is running and I'm not going to turn it off just to have a quiet house. So during all that time, every day, I basically just in the morning record one chapter because I've been working my back list for a couple of years now, trying to catch up. So I would just record one chapter of the book, and after about a month, I'll have got the whole thing recorded and move right on to the next one. And then later in the day, I will spend, and then a chapter will take me 15 minutes to a half hour, depending on the length. And then later in the day, I'll spend another, hour or so editing it and making a list of punch-ins that I need to do at some point in the future. And then in the winter, I do all the editing. I really will start editing heavily and get everything going. So as a result, we're in the fall, but last month I had 4 audiobooks drop in about 2 weeks, just because I'm just editing a lot more now and mastering and doing all of that. So yeah, my process is completely different because my needs are different. And I have, like I said, I have had cases where other people have done the work for me, which is really nice. It's wonderful to have somebody else do it all for you and just show up and there it is. But I don't know, I have fun doing that. I'm trying to think. I love the recording part. I love the editing part. All of it. The only part I really just don't enjoy is doing punch-ins because it's just annoying. But it doesn't take that long, and I've gotten much better at editing, so I can fix a lot before I have to resort to re-recording.
So what are punch-ins for the people that aren't?
Punch-ins are there. So at least for me, sometimes there are mistakes that are, especially if they're audio mistakes where there might be, I don't know, maybe my computer was suddenly downloading something and there's a huge pop that I can't cut out without ruining the sentence, or a major flub that somehow I missed. Because usually if I flub, I'll just re-record the sentence and move on and edit it out. But sometimes I miss, I think something sounds good and it doesn't, and so you need to go back and re-record that sentence or that phrase, and that's a punch-in. And I don't have a full high-tech studio. I have enough equipment to get the job done, but I can't recreate the exact sound conditions that I had 2 months ago when I recorded it the first time. So I really try to do anything I can to avoid a punch-in, unless if it's really short, nobody will know. But if it's a full couple sentences, if I really messed up, which I did a lot more of in the beginning when I was learning what I was doing, then it's just, you'll see this in movies. You'll watch a movie and suddenly the actor's voice will just completely shift for a moment. And you're like, what was that? Well, that was recorded like a year later in completely different conditions. So it doesn't match what was going, the rest of the sound. But That's a punching.
Perfect. Thank you. So, John, what would you suggest to someone that was looking to get into the business?
Run far away.
How did I know that was possible?
No, actually, one of my current acting coaches, Sean Allen Pratt, he has a wonderful link. It's easily found. You just Google, "So I want to be a narrator." And he has a wonderful bit that he goes through. This was the party question for years. Not that I'm a big partier, but you would go out and, "Oh, you're an audiobook narrator. Oh, my friends tell me I have a lovely voice. I would love to do that." How many of us here have heard? Yeah. So it used to be, well, you go on to ACX and then maybe you get a microphone and have you done any acting in your life? And you get all these. Nowadays, I just send them to that link and it's wonderful. And basically the essence of it is, Sean Allen Pratt explains, here's the deal. Find a book you like, sit down in a room for 2 hours a day and read that book aloud. If you mess up, stop and go back to the beginning of the sentence. Do that for 2 hours a day for a week. Call me and let me know if you're still having a good time. It's that simple. I've never gotten anyone that called me back after I told them to go do that. It's amazing because really that in essence, that's what the job is, except add a few hours onto it, because that's what typically most of us professional narrators do. Most of us are in here for at least 2 hours, me 6 hours, sometimes 8, depends on what my deadlines are. And sometimes you don't like the book. Sometimes it happens too. We all work those projects as well. Overall, though, for somebody of my ilk, and I think most of the other people, including the dog on the bottom, this is the best job in the world. It really is. You couldn't get anything more custom made for somebody like me. I get to pretend to be other people all day long. It's the best thing ever. I get to make funny voices for a living. But yeah, Google, "So I want to be an audiobook narrator." That's what I suggest.
Perfect. Kale?
Yeah, similar to John, there's there's a website called the Narrator's Roadmap, I believe. A woman named Karen Commons put together, and it is similar to what John. I think the video that John referenced that Sean Pratt has is referenced there. It's a collection of resources that that can help you get started, and a lot of them are that kind of So you think you want to do this? Well, here's what the reality is. And that does scare a lot of people off. And even if they do take the plunge a little bit, I have a lot of friends who, who are actors as well, who have wanted to get into this over the years, especially as I've gotten deeper into it. And some of them have, and some of them are wonderful and love it as much as we do, and have a passion for for storytelling and for writing and books. And I think that comes with it a little bit too. I've always been a big reader. My wife was an English major, and that was part of what got her into this. And so that passion, and we both listen to a lot of audiobooks. I know a lot of narrators do that as well. I love listening. I'm always listening to audiobooks as well. And I'm just in awe of this whole community. Just so many great storytellers, and it's so exciting to get a new project and bring it to life, and know that you're going to be able to bring that to people who I've talked to to fans and people who I had surgery, and now I lost a lot of my eyesight. I can't read, but I was a big reader. Now all I do is listen to audiobooks, and I was able to listen to such and such a series, and it brought me through this time. And it's stories like that really make it so great. But you really have to have a passion for it, to get those results. You need to, like John said, I'm sitting in this little box for 6 to 8 hours a day and every day. But I love that. I know also a lot of friends who have asked to do this. I think they have a different idea of a lot of this, because they're used to thinking about commercial voiceover and voiceover in 15-second, 30-second bits. And they say, wouldn't it be great if I could set up a studio, especially in the times we're in? A lot more people, especially my friends in the theater community, which is going to be shut down for the next year and a half, probably at least, say, well, how can I stay creative and, do this and that. But I think a lot of them think, well, if I get a 15-second national commercial, that'll pay me, over many $1,000. And, it's an hour in the booth. It's great. I can spend the rest of the week doing whatever. They don't see the work that we put in. And, in addition to the 6 to 8 hours in the booth, I get out, we have a 2-year-old daughter, we put her to bed at, 7 or so. After that, we're prepping our next books. We're on the computer. We're researching, all these terms and names and words we're unfamiliar with for our next book. So it's become our lifestyle, and it's one that works for me. But I don't think works for a lot of actors, because they're used to that immediacy. They're used to, they're used to the feedback, and they're used to, I don't know, they're not used to these long hours that we put in, talking constantly. But it's, you really have to have a passion for it. That's what I tell them. I'm happy to talk to any of my friends because I love so much what I do. And if people love this, I want them to discover this like I did. If this is something that would enrich someone's life, especially in these times when a lot of other performative pursuits are just not there, I would love to give this gift to someone as I felt it was given to me. But you need to love it. You can bring a horse to water, but if that horse just wants to run in the field all day, it's not going to work.
All right. And Joel, what your take on this, and something that might surprise people about what you do for the 6, 8, 10, 12 hours?
I think that there are misconceptions that can lead people to this as a career. I think that no matter how passionate you are about books, no matter how much you love to read, you have to have a background in performing. If you're going to succeed at this as an actual profession, it is an acting job. We do not read for a living, we act for a living. And I think that can be a misconception. And I think that another big thing that a lot of people try and come at this from radio, because a lot of people have amazing voices and are told that they use their voices beautifully. But that's not what makes you a good audiobook narrator. What makes you a good audiobook narrator is being able to connect emotionally to a story and bring it to life. And just having a pure, impressive instrument can often be a hindrance, because those guys are used to playing tone. Those people are used to simply focusing on the quality of sound they're producing, not connecting emotionally to text. And I think that can be a big disconnect. And even if you're the greatest actor in the world, you've got to work with somebody who is an expert in this field before you start thinking you know what you're doing, because it's a totally different art form. If theater is one level of energy and performance, and you pull that down to TV 3-camera sitcom style filming, and you pull that down to a tight close-up in a movie, you have to pull that we're inside their head. Our performance is literally, most people are listening with earphones. We are inside their brain, speaking to them. And that's how intimate and exposed your performance is. And that's the level that's the level of intimacy you have to create. And for a lot of people coming at it from theater, it's something, I'm working with some Broadway people right now that want to get into this. And it's a huge struggle for them to learn how different of a performance technique it is. And it's frightening in some ways, because everything is stripped down, and it can feel to them like you're doing nothing, when in fact you're doing everything. It's just so subtle and distilled. And you've got to have a whole bunch of weird skills. I mean, actors get 2 weeks of rehearsal to do, let's say they're the lead in a play. Let's say it's a one-person show, right? They'll get 2 weeks of rehearsal to maybe do 90 minutes, which in text is probably 40 pages, right? we have to pump out 300 pages playing every single character with no rehearsal. None. We maybe get a pre-read, we do get a pre-read, but it's not out loud. You have to have amazing cold reading skills. You have to have incredible text analysis facility. You have to have vocal endurance. Like, you've got to train to have an instrument that can sustain itself speaking for 8 hours a day. The only people that have the issues that we have when you go to a speech pathologist or you go to an ENT are school teachers. They're the only other people who do what we do to the level that we do of the vocal energy and having to sustain. You've got to have a facility for dialects. Even if you say I'm not an accent guy, you're going to end up with accents in your books. Anybody who does more than 10 books in their career is going to deal with accents coming at them left, right, and center. They may not be first person, they may not be extensive, but they've got to be able to have that facility. So there's a lot of tools that I think people don't factor in when they think about this being an option for them. And if you've got those tools or you're willing to work to get them, it's the greatest career in the world. But you've got to know coming into it, I don't know everything. You have to kind of, no matter what your training is previously, no matter what your talent level is, you've got to know, I don't know this art form and I have to learn to study it. I have to study it like something completely new.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Stuart.
Well, for me, people don't usually ask me how to get into audiobook narration, but I do have a lot of authors coming up to me going, how do I, narrate my own books? And my answer for them 99% of the time is don't. Just go hire people who know what they're doing. Because most authors, I've sat in on tons of author readings, and it's my opinion that most authors shouldn't read their own work because it's just not a skill. Most authors don't have all those skills. That's, a lot of authors are introverted. They're not the kind of people who have a theater background to get up on stage and all that. And so they just don't have it. And I don't try to be so discouraging as to literally say don't, but I say a lot of things that in a modified form that we've already heard, that while you're not going to be necessarily, while I don't, for example, do 8 hours a day, I do have to ultimately put in the same amount of hours to get a book done, because you have to record it, you have to edit it, all that work has to get done. And I think a lot of authors, especially when they see somebody like myself, when I've been fairly successful with my audiobooks, and I knew I was on after my first audiobook when I was kind of like, I'm not sure, I think I did a good job, but who knows. When I started seeing people, readers say, oh, I saw it was narrated by the author and I was really scared, but I tried it anyway, and now I love this series and all that. Then I knew I was then that all my different odd podge talents came together and it worked. I said, though, for most people, I'm just like, just hire somebody, because they're all trying to get around the cost. It's very expensive to hire these people. You guys are wonderful, but for an indie author, sometimes it's really hard, especially if I make a full-time living as an author, but most authors don't, and it's to come up with a couple grand for a book, then you're not sure, especially if it's your first audiobook and you're not sure if you're going to make that back, can be very daunting. And so they're all looking for a shortcut. And I try to say everything that's been said here to try and say to them, it's not a shortcut. It's twice as much work as you think it's going to be, and so you may actually save money by having somebody else to do it and using that time to write another book. But if you have the talents for it, the skills, I should say, and you find it fun, then great, go for it.
I think a lot of people, to go back to what Kale was saying, are looking at the 15, 30-second commercial thing and thinking, yeah, that'd be so easy to do, but not taking into account what Joel was saying about you're paying also for the acting ability, the vocal ability, the the ability to scale down the acting, to take out the motions and the,
You're also paying for the editing and the mastering. People, it's another thing a lot of people don't realize is, for every final hour that you actually hear when you buy an audiobook, there can be 2 to 3 hours of work there. It may be, if it's an hour of audio, of actual audio, it may have been an hour and a half to 2 hours of actual speaking, at least depending on the skill and how many mistakes are made. But there's at least, if I have 15 minutes of audio, it's going to take me a half hour to edit that. It just is.
The industry standard is 6 hours. That's what people in the industry will tell you, that for every finished hour of audio, someone somewhere, the proofer, the masterer, the editor, the person pre-reading it, the person doing the research for how to say a name in, Genoa, that adds up to 6 hours per finished hour of audio if you're average.
Yeah, I can believe that, because like I said, it might take me double just to edit it, but then you have to go back and master it. You have all these different steps. It adds up real fast. So it's not a shortcut for an author to do it themselves. And like I said, unless you really love it, it's not necessarily going to save you. It'll save you cash up front, but that may not be as worthwhile as you think it is. So that's usually the conversation I end up having with people.
And one more thing authors should be aware of, because I've heard authors say, I do all my own readings and the audiences love them and they go great, etc., etc. First of all, an author reading, no matter how skilled, is nothing like an audiobook. And very often, an author will come to audio not being a listener of audio. And they do not know the stylistic expectations of voracious listeners who are already immersed in what it is. You know what I mean? They don't know the intimacy of it. They don't know what to expect, or the skill level, or the level of acting that's required. So I really encourage authors to become avid listeners of their genre before they jump into casting or into audio as something they're going to pursue.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple things you hit on that I think are important. One, a reading, like you said, is a very different animal, and you can do really well at readings even if you're a terrible reader, because people are seeing you in person. And that's part of the excitement for a lot of readers, is they're getting to see their favorite author in the flesh. So it doesn't matter that they're not a very good reader. And if you happen to be a good reader, it's even better. But yes, listening to audiobooks, my wife is a voracious audiobook listener. So my initial research, I was able to ask her a zillion questions and then have her say, well, listen to this person. And one of the first things I picked up on was that pacing is very different in an audiobook than it would be when I read to an audience. So that's just as an example. So yeah, everything Joel said is absolutely right. And authors just don't, they're, especially indie authors, I think they're often looking at it as the business opportunity is to exploit something they created and get more money. But they forget sometimes that it's a whole art form of its own and needs to be treated as a whole new thing, in a sense.
All right. KJ, I know everyone else has given a lot of answers. Any surprises that you think haven't been touched on?
Not really. Everybody was super thorough. I would just reiterate getting some kind of performance coaching. Now everything's on Zoom, so you can find like a really snazzy coach that maybe you couldn't have worked with in person, because now they're doing things digitally. So just really work on your own craft and work on your acting skills. And like everybody's been saying, listen to audiobooks. Maybe pick a genre that you're really into, whatever you happen to like reading for pleasure. Listen to those. See if your voice would be suited for that. See if you feel like you could encompass all the emotion necessary to tell a story in that genre. But yeah, just really focus on acting. You are a voice actor, so make sure your acting is strong, and then you can work on your endurance and the specifics and different accents and all of that. Yeah,
you.
everybody covered everything really well.
So I think the one last question, and I'll go ahead and start with you, Kale. Been hearing a little bit about this thing called Audiblegate. Just wanted to get everyone's kind of take on it and what you think that's going to do to impact the future of narration.
Yeah, I have read a little bit about this, and my understanding is for the listeners, watchers who don't know, Audible has this policy and has been promoting this policy as a selling point of its subscriptions that you can return a book, no questions asked, for a credit, and exchange it for another book. The the issue being that the sale of that book that is returned is also taken back from the author, publisher, whatever. So this impacts especially indie authors. I haven't had much time to think a lot about this or to read a lot about this, but from my point of view, Audible's interesting because they're the juggernaut in this industry. And they keep a lot of things running, and they have innovated a lot too, and allowed for these opportunities. I mean, if ACX hadn't come about, some of us probably, never would have gotten started in the way that we did at the time that we did. But even in the time that, in the 5, 6, 7 years that I've been around, there have been a lot of changes. There used to be much higher incentives for narrators working, especially working in closer collaboration on certain projects with indie authors in terms of royalty share and levels of royalty, both for those contracts and for the authors themselves, have changed, and they can change them at will because they are that big and they have such dominance over the industry. So it's always been a slippery slope. I have seen these uproars a few times now with their with their romance package that happened. There was a big uproar then too. When you have a monopoly like that, and they're gonna keep pushing the boundaries, and these things are gonna keep happening. One thing I'm encouraged by is that there is a lot more competition now than there was 6 or 7 years ago. There are other outlets that authors can go to get an audiobook produced, and as you get higher up that self-publishing ladder, there are even Cory Doctorow. I don't know if anybody saw it. He just self-published. I mean, he's a bigger writer. He just published a new book for I think through Macmillan, and he retained his audio rights because he is big. He writes science fiction, and he's big against these, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons of the world, creating these monopolies. So he wanted to separate from that, and he did a Kickstarter to create his newest audiobook. Like I said, that's not going to be everybody's. It's not going to work for everybody at this point, but what it shows is that there are other options, and this is not a static thing. This is continuously changing, but I think the more we talk about it, and the more authors and narrators and the creatives talk about how this affects us, there are platforms for us to talk now too. That's something that wasn't around, 10, 20 years ago. When you can create a Twitter storm of some kind of visual, something that the media could provide to bigger organizations. We have the power of social media if we work together. So I think the more we talk about this, the more we advocate for the artists, because without the artists, these big companies they'd be out of luck. And so it starts with us. There is power in that, even though it seems like a lot of the power is out of our hands, and a lot of people are getting hurt now, especially a lot of authors. And it's really hard to see, especially during this time when a lot of people are out of work. And we we've seen authors have seen their incomes shrink over time on other platforms. It's really hard, but we need to keep having these conversations. We need to advocate for each other, and ideally break up these monopolies. But the more competition that is out there, and the more we can use these other platforms to use our voices that we have to say, I can't go along with Audible, Amazon, and authors telling their fans what's going on, because that's the tough sell, is when you're talking to your readers, your listeners, your fans, and saying, this is hurting me, but they're saying, well, look, I'm out of a job. I don't have healthcare. I don't have this, that, and the other thing. If I have my Audible subscription, and I can just return this book for another book, that keeps me going. They often don't see the suffering on the other side from the authors. So, I think my big takeaway is just continuing the conversation, advocating for each other, and encouraging competition.
Thank you. Joel. You're muted.
Sorry,
still.
I was muted. Kale covered it in great detail. I think the two things are, if Audible wants to have such a ridiculous policy, which it is, it's absurd. There's no way of justifying, if somebody listens to an entire thing, they should be able to bring it back. If you went to a bookstore and the spine on a book had been broken 58 times in the middle of it, and it had dog-eared pages and coffee stains on it, Barnes & Noble isn't going to take it back. It's that simple. So if they want that policy to encourage people to jump into audio, and it's not like it's not the most booming freaking industry in the world. I almost said the F word, but it's not like that. It's like they're hungry for listeners. This industry is growing faster than almost any other, certainly in the publishing world. So, but if they're desperate to try and, lure in listeners, they need to absorb that cost themselves as a cost of doing business. It shouldn't be taken away from indie authors and from us when it's a royalty share project. I think the good news is for us that audio isn't going to go anywhere. People, even with the pandemic and people not commuting as much, and that you would have thought had taken a huge hit for a big part of this market, that's how they listen. It's still growing. It has still been exponentially rising in terms of sales and listeners. So I don't think we need to panic about this particular part of our industry, other than financially it may become a volume game more than it was before. And that's the challenge is, I think Audible has this thing where they want to cater to the listeners, and there are that will listen to 3 romance books a day on 3 times the speed. And you see these people posting on Facebook, how can I get more books? How can I get more books? Well, you buy them. Just because you can listen to 3 a day doesn't mean that's a right, doesn't mean it's a privilege. And catering to that voracious audience isn't going to do anything but hurt anyone else if it's not actually making money. The Netflix model is going to happen to us. That is, it is happening already, and people in the industry say that it is on its way. Like the pay per title model is going to disappear. We just have to, rely on our unions and rely on authors, and to try and hope that this is a sustainable profession while it happens. But I think that the good news is that people are going to keep listening, and that only will grow. So we will still have a place. We just need to figure out how it's a fair place for all, I guess.
All right, thank you. Stuart, you get both ends of it.
Well, yeah, yeah. And actually, I'm curious if Audible sent an email to the publishers. I don't know if you guys got it as narrators. I mean, it was like months after this all started, so I thought it was really oddly late for them to try and address it. And on face value, if you take what they say to be the truth, and this much is true, these policies have always been in place. It seems that it's only recently that listeners figured out how they could game the system and just started doing it in mass. And that whether or not Audible actually pushed them to do that, promoted them to do that, I've not followed it closely enough. And part of that is because I've been through this so many times as a writer, as an indie author through KDP, which is the ACX of Amazon, and how we all publish our books. And I've been doing this now for 7-8 years, and they change the rules every so often, and there's a massive hysteria, and there are people who were last month making 6 figures a month, and now it's cut in half, and they've never had that kind of money before, so they spent it poorly, and now they're freaking out and all that kind of stuff. And it happens over and over. And this is not what I'm saying, is not to discount anything about the seriousness of it, but the point is that it's the nature of the business we're in with the people who dominate the delivery systems, and that is that they are going to change the rules every so often. And as a writer, and as an audio publisher, part of my job is to kind of bob and weave and do my best to say, okay, now these are the new rules. How do I make a buck, make a living doing it this way? As Joel pointed out, I mean, this industry, the audio industry is growing huge in the last couple of years, and will continue to before it starts to slow down and level out, as all businesses will. And as these rules, there's enough pushback, I think, right now, that Audible eventually is going to try and come up with some kind of fix to their rules for the short term, but they're eventually going to change the rules again. But there is a point where of supply and demand. There's a lot of people jumping into audiobooks right now, into narration. Half of them, if not more, a couple months from now, are going to go do something else. But the people like these fine people here who are doing it for a full-time living and so forth, they're going to, just like I do with books, you have to change the way you do things to stay in business, because there's always going to be that demand. And if the rules ever get to a point where you can't make a living, too many narrators will just leave to go make a living doing something else, and then that will mess up the supply and demand side, and that will force Audible or whoever's top dog at that point to change the rules so that they have people to create the material they need to sell. I hope that made sense. There's a lot to unpack there, but I mean, I guess ultimately what I'm saying is that in the short term, it sucks, and we all have to kind of figure out how to make it work. In the long term, I don't really sweat these things too much, because I've already been through so many of them, and I just know it's part of running your own business, because the rules just keep changing, and you do the best you can.
KJ?
Well, I think part of the issue is that the listeners are just kind of unaware of what's going on. Because I think that if they knew whenever they did a return that Audible was going yoink to the money from the authors and producers and narrators, that they wouldn't use Audible like a library. Because that's basically what Audible is kind of pushing right now, is that they're more of a library and less of a bookstore. And if they weren't taking the royalties back from the content creators, I don't think any of us would care. But it's the fact that it is affecting our bottom lines that has everybody going like, hey, I mean, you listen to the whole thing, bud. Maybe you don't return it for the next in the series and listen to the entire series on one credit if you like it that much to listen to the whole thing. So I think it's also about education and just letting the listeners know how the policy actually works. Because from their perspective, it is a great policy. I mean, you get 1 credit a month and you can use that on all of the books. Why, heck yes, of course I'll be a member. But I think when you learn that it's Audible's always going to pass the buck to the little guy. They didn't become the giant gorilla in the room by being a sweetheart. So they just, they're going to do what's best for them. And I think it is, like Stuart was saying, it's going to take a lot of content creators saying, well, we just won't use you anymore. And for them to realize that they need those content creators and they need to come up with some kind of better policy. And I don't think any of us begrudge a return policy, because if somebody listens to 10 minutes of you and says, I just can't take KJ, I cannot listen to more of her, then yeah, return the book and get something you want to listen to. But if you listen to the whole book and it's been a year, or if you're just recycling your 1 credit, then that really does hurt content creators.
Yeah, it does. Unfortunately, and there is a group of readers who, if they knew, would happily not do what they're doing.
Yeah.
But we get this again as a writer. I see this all the time. You get speed readers who will just they'll go through your whole series in like 2 days and return the whole thing and read it and return it. Or they read it, they crack into it, turn it into a PDF and return them. And it's, to me, it hurts my bottom line significantly. But my significant bottom line is like not even a minute of what Amazon makes, in a minute. So they don't care, and they're just not going to. So the educating readers is, I get people who will complain about a $4.99 for an ebook. I just don't have $4 and I can't do it. And I'm like, there's this thing called a library. Go. I get paid if you get a book from a library, and that's true of audiobooks too. So and audiobooks are expensive. I mean, $25 for an audiobook, is a lot for people. And I always say, go get it from a library. I get paid. You all get paid, and that's the way it should, that's the only kind of education I've been able to do. But people are just, they want what they want. And I don't mean to crap on readers, but because I love them, because they are my bread and butter. But at least my experience has been, it's really hard to change their behavior. It's much easier for us to change Audible's behavior by saying, if you continue this policy in mass, we're all going elsewhere. And not that that's easy to accomplish, but I find that to be the route that in the past at least has gotten the most effective responses. And usually it has to be from their real cash cows. So, if I say to KDP, well, if you keep this policy up, I'm leaving, they'll be like, bye. But if, several small publishers or, somebody like, I don't know, like Mark Dawson, who makes, millions as an indie author, when he's not happy, they pay attention.
Finally, John.
Yeah, everybody's had great points. I kind of have a dog in this race. I've been in business for 7 or 8 years now, but I owned Falcon Sound Company before. I have 140 royalty share titles. I've sold over 100,000 books. I've paid my mortgage for 7 or 8 years off of my royalty checks. So trust me, I feel it. I've been affected. But the fact of the matter is, I'm a small business owner, and them's the rules. It is what it is. You better roll with the punches. And I've had to do this time and time again. We had CodeGate last year. Prior to that, now I empathize with everybody that's being affected by this. Trust me. Not only myself, but my clients. I get it. The fact is, over the last 5 years, something like that, I get this a lot. Audio is a long game. It's a thin profit margin to begin with, but this is like the stock market. the fact is, leave your money in. That's how you make money on this. You leave your money in for a long period of time, and typically you're going to make your money back, hopefully. When a newer client comes to me as an indie client and they want to invest in audio, I try to explain to them, some of these don't make their money back. Just that simple. And that is a fact of our existence. Some do. Some make a good amount of money. When I was focusing on royalty share titles in particular, if 1 out of 10 made their money back, I was pretty happy. And oftentimes 1 out of every 10 titles would actually pay for the other 10. That's kind of the way this works. That being said, it being a long game, I don't like this policy any better than anybody else. But the fact is, I've known for a long period of time, Audible and Amazon could care less what we think. They're not asking us. They're not sending emails out saying, "What do you think about our new policy?" We
But
can either choose.
John, just to interrupt you for 1 sec, I think you do need to recognize that there is a big difference between the time it takes you to produce 10 titles in audio and the time it took an author to write 10 books.
Absolutely.
And I think so saying to them, "Oh, it's a gamble, throw your 10 titles in," that might be 2 years of their life versus 2 weeks of our life. So I think it's just careful to sound cavalier about that.
Yeah, no, I see your point, and I acknowledge it. I think my point is that some authors, from my experience, some authors are hopping into audio too early. Let's say if you have 2 titles out and you've sold, let's say, I'm going to toss a number out there, 500 books, you probably shouldn't be getting into Audible yet. It's not a good time. That's kind of my point there, but I definitely see yours. Now, that being said, this development may be another straw that broke the camel's back that means that some authors are not going to get into audiobooks. And I don't know how I can change that. But what I do know is the authors that are successfully already in audio, most of them are probably going to continue being in audio. And you can make money in it. This is a policy that we're going to have to adjust to. And I don't see, personally, I myself, I don't see a large group of us changing this policy. I wish it was the case. And if it happens, I'll be very happy about it and I'll be on board with trying. But I don't see Audible asking us if we care and what our opinion on it is one way or the other. As a small business owner, what I'm doing with my 140 royalty share titles is I'm figuring out how to bob and weave, just like Stuart said, and how to adjust. That's my opinion. Thanks.
Perfect. So let's just go around the room one more time, let people know where they can find you on the internet. We'll start with you, Joel.
If you're looking for my sort of websites, joelfrumkinnarration.com or joelleslieaudio.com. No, wait, joelfrumkinaudio.com, joelleslieNarration.com. Either one, you'll get to me. I'm on Twitter. My Facebook fan group, which is delightful and frolicking and fun and goofy, is Joel's Junkies on Facebook. Yeah, look me up on Audible and all that stuff. I'm easy to find.
Perfect. Stuart.
I know this is a shocker, but it's stuartjaffe.com. And as far as social media goes, mostly I spend my time on Facebook, so you can find me there. My books are easy to find on Amazon, on Audible, and Apple is the other way you can get audiobooks from me. So happy listening.
All right, KJ.
Well, you can find me at kjthevoiceactor.com. I am also on the Book of Face. It's also KJ the Voice Actor on basically all the social things. Look up KJ the Voice Actor and you'll find me. I'd love to chat.
All right, John.
JohnSoloNarrates.com, and my Facebook group is where I am most days. That's John Solo's Beard Brigade. And you're more than welcome. We do videos 3 or 4 days a week.
All right, and finally, Kale.
You can find a lot of my work at SeanPatrickHopkins.com. For my romance work is Kale Williams. You can find me, I do have a website at kalewilliamsvoice.weebly.com. You can find me on Facebook, friend me there. There's a group called Kale Williams Listeners that you can join, and be a part of the community there, or on Twitter at Kale Williams VO.
All right, perfect. And I do want to thank all of you for attending and everyone for watching. Have a good one, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jason.